see with our on our perfect. Like anybody want to confirm that we are or are not live? I mean, it says we are. I'm even if we're not, we'll just have our conversation and then we'll just upload it later. So it'll
That
be
sounds
fine. Oh,
good.
it says we're live at least on YouTube. So maybe we're just scrolling
Amazing.
on
Well, look, we're
LinkedIn.
live
Who knows?
somewhere
Who
and
even
in real life.
right. I feel like you can't have a conversation about burnout and mental health and all of those things and not have technical difficulties and expect the unexpected. So,
So true.
for those that are able to join us, hi everyone. Welcome to Amplify Your Signal. My name is Nicole Roberts. I'm the host. I have my wonderful friend Renee Robson here with us today. And we first met, we were actually trying to figure it out before we started recording. We first met through, believe it or not, Twitter, like the HR world that used to exist on Twitter with the fabulous Mary Kaler, who is the ultimate connector of all people. And we were both bloggers, influencers, whatever they used to call us, as part of basically the social media for National SHRM. And then Renee went to a couple of state conferences, including Ohio. So then we were able to connect there and meet in real life. But I am so thrilled to have her joining us today. She has made such a courageous shift from HR and organizational leadership into trauma informed uh, counseling and consulting. And the work that she's doing is just so important and so needed right now. So, Renee, welcome. And thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's so lovely to talk. And as you were talking about those conferences, I was just having flashbacks of like such fun times at them all, which is funny because non-HR people don't understand how fun HR conferences can be. Um, I I worked in HR for around 20 years, so primarily like organizational design and leadership development. Um, and I live in Australia, although I'm originally from New Zealand, and live here with my husband and son and my furry son. Um, I have, for the last few years, been a yoga teacher and have studied and specialized in trauma sensitive and trauma informed yoga facilitation, which I guess, long story short, is using evidence based practices to help support people's body and mind after trauma or chronic stress. And while I was doing that, I was also heading up the professional development team for one of Australia's largest charities, looking after the disability and mental health professional development function, which was really awesome. And in that process, and with my own studies and work in the community, really started to heavily integrate those trauma informed principles and trauma informed leadership into my work. And then it all kind of just came together with a year ago, and I founded a social enterprise with our aim being making workplaces and community spaces happier and more welcoming. So to do that, I teach and educate and consult around trauma informed practice and specifically trauma informed leadership and how you can apply that thinking to systems and leadership programs, because a lot of the practice is about the I guess the end interaction between the person supporting somebody and the other person, and applying it to systems is, I guess, a bit of a new area. So I'm doing that. I teach yoga teachers trauma-informed yoga facilitation.
Mm.
I do workshops and things, but primarily workplace education and consulting now.
I love that. And I mean, as many people know that, I was diagnosed with breast cancer not long after losing my job. And looking back, I was in kind of a constant state of fight or flight for years. And I certainly did not know how to slow down. I thought hustling and really overextending myself was just kind of the price of success, but it was costing me my health. And I know when we were talking before about just kind of how chronic stress can show up in the body and how healing doesn't have to look like traditional like talk therapy. Can you help us to understand how the stress response really kind of operates and how it relates to trauma.
Um, One of my favorite parts of my work is talking to people about this because I think that there is often a lot of self blame and shame when people are thinking about or talking about their own stress responses or the ones that they deal with. So, by stress responses, I mean like when people get escalated into a fight response or a flight response, or perhaps their nervous system comes down and they move into like a freeze or a fawn response. So, those responses and kind of ways of being and emotions, the idea is that when we are overloaded, whether that is from the impact of trauma in the body or chronic stress or a lot of other things that can impact our allostatic load, when that happens, we can slip into those stress responses more easily. Um, and I think that a lot of people, and certainly that I deal with in the corporate space, often are operating in a fight or flight stress response, like a escalated, what I think we jokingly like, we talk about it being a bit type A or whatever.
Hmm.
Sometimes that is quite compulsive for people and they can't actually get out of it. So
Hmm.
when we're talking about chronic stress, people go, oh, that's that thing over there, those that's those people who are like in burnout or like not a no, it's self-reportedly chronic stress is 50% of the working population. Yeah, and that's not even to mention the people who are experiencing that who are not in employment or are finding that difficult or have other reasons that they're not in the workplace, but 50% of people in the workplace. Think about what chronic stress does to the body and brain and that connection between the two. If we have a whole lot of people who have experienced trauma, who are having mental health challenges, who are under chronic stress, and they are dealing with other people, that those stress responses are liable to come out, right? And it can be really disruptive. Like within groups, it can be disruptive and upsetting for people when that stuff happens and they don't understand what's going on.
Hmm.
So the principles around trauma-informed practice have come from the idea of what are the evidence-based ways that we can respond to that and be able to create containers, for lack of a
Hmm.
better way to put it, containers for people to be able to engage in what they're doing, hopefully, without being pushed into those stress responses any more than they need to be. Can't make a world without stress. You can't
Hmm.
remove triggers for everyone. Like, that's not what this is about at all.
Right.
But we can be more understanding of what those are for ourselves and maybe the people that we work around.
Mhm.
And then maybe we can think about how we might choose to change our behavior or change our systems or change what we do based on that knowledge. Um, so that idea of chronic stress being this big thing over there, it's not. It's something that many of us are dealing with the majority of the time, with
Mhm.
that impact of those people being up in a stress zone
Yeah.
and what that means in the workplace, what that means with your family, what that means with your ability to engage and do the things that you want to do. It
Mhm.
changes all of that. So it's easily one of my favorite things to talk about because I think it allows a conversation around this is about how your body and brain works,
Mhm.
not as much about you've done something wrong or you need to learn how to do this better.
Yeah. Yeah. We, we have both worked with leaders and obviously been leaders who are really just trying to get it right and trying to do the right thing. But many people are certainly not equipped to lead in kind of trauma aware ways. What does trauma informed leadership look like in action?
There are a lot of similarities between trauma informed leadership with authentic leadership and servant leadership. So, there's a wonderful researcher in the States, Dr. Rebecca Lloyd, who has studied trauma informed leadership and her work's really, really helpful for me. Um, so, the idea of the principles of trauma informed leadership, depending on who you talk to, is about six. People might articulate them in different ways.
Mhm.
But how that looks in practice is the idea of it's not about the words on the wall because
Mhm.
people don't you don't believe words on a wall, right? Like,
Mhm.
especially these days, people believe you through your action, they believe you through their experiences with you. So, the most important part of trauma informed leadership is it's actually something that is practiced. So, for example, in a leadership context, the idea of authenticity, we all know, if you study HR and you've worked in the space, you know that when you do a large organizational change, you want to be as upfront as possible. You want to include people in all of the points that are appropriate to include them. You want to support them in what they're doing. And you're always really aware of that 30% drop in productivity after it all happens for the people that remain, right? Because it's disruptive and it's and it's stressful and it's triggering. Yes. So if you are going through a process like that with trauma-informed leadership principles in mind, authenticity is really critical. So what you would do is you would be doing things like, for the leaders involved, you'd be coaching them about how to be authentic and honest and not betraying their own values. And then how do you navigate that and hold space for other people who might also be like emotionally impacted by what's going on. Sometimes in organizations or maybe places that have a slightly older school approach to HR, you might see more things like surprise attack redundancies. Hey guys, we've been working on this secretly behind the scenes for the last few months, and now we're going to tell you all about it. And then what happens inevitably when that happens is all of the people involved, whether they're being made redundant or not, go, all of those emails, they were about this. That excuse my boss made up to find out about the supply for this thing, that was obviously a lie. And people start to add all those things together, and it doesn't matter if they stay or not, right? Trust is blown. And when you blow trust with people, it is something that's really difficult to get back. So trauma-informed leadership is really about how do you integrate these principles where we know they make a difference with people to have a positive impact. And the positive impact is incredible. It's all about the idea of how do you actually create and embed psychosocial safety, because we know that that will help buffer against a lot of the negative workplace things that can happen. But also it's the biggest driver of team effectiveness, according to Google's work. So like, there's not really a good reason to not do that, other than, if I go back to that example, maybe not thinking through the impacts of the changes that we make and how we behave. And especially where we go, I've got these values over here, but I'm willing to leave them aside in this situation because my boss has asked me to, or we really need a quick win, or the circumstances somehow different and unique. And the idea of trauma-informed leadership is that that might be true, but if that was really true, you could deal with it authentically and still be honest with people and still not necessarily damage that trust. So many ways to do that from an HR and organizational design perspective, right? Like, there are just so many ethical ways to do things. Like, why would you do it in an old school way that you know is going to impact your leaders and maybe their moral injury and having to lie? The people that get made redundant, maybe fairly or unfairly, and then the people that remain whose productivity drops, who often still part of that 50% chronic stress, right? Those events, what they do to the staff remaining is massive. And the amount of organizational big events that happen per year now for an average employee is astronomical. I think it was like 2 planned organizational changes per annum in like 2014, and by 2022 it was 11. Wow. And I think that, like, I think 2022 seems like golden age now. I'd love to see those figures in 2025. Right. So, sorry.
No, go ahead. So how would you coach someone to respond versus react in kind of those moments, like when they can feel it? What is your guidance on responding versus reacting in those kind of moments of stress like that?
I'd say that's probably the hardest thing for many people to learn. I certainly still will find myself reacting before responding in different situations. My most helpful thing, and it sounds really cheesy and really simple, so bear with me, but taking a breath. It sounds like, oh, you should just take a breath and touch grass or whatever. But no, like, there's a really good body-based reason for us to do this. It is control of breath is our best hack into our nervous system.
Mhm.
So most of the things that your nervous system is controlling, you don't necessarily have conscious control over.
Mhm.
However, our breath, we can take it over, which means it's as effective, if not more effective, than like Xanax, taking medication, doing all of these other things. You can use your breath to calm down in that moment. Now the
Yeah.
challenge is making that a routine where you feel yourself become overwhelmed or you notice those sensations in your body, and then you're able to do something to de-escalate, to
Mhm.
be able to provide yourself a moment to have, your first thought isn't always the best one.
Mhm.
Providing yourself time to have that second thought, which is actually like who you are as a person and what you want to do,
Mm.
but you need to give yourself time between those two, right? And
Mm.
a breath, however
Mhm.
cheesy it sounds, can provide your nervous system and brain an opportunity to reset just a little bit, to
Mm.
give you time to catch up. So what happens when you have that stress response is your prefrontal cortex and your reptile brain stop talking to each other as well. So
Mm.
your reptile brain's like, ah, there's danger. I need a
Mhm.
fight, or like, I need to get out of here. And your prefrontal cortex isn't as able to tell it, hey, actually, that's just an email from your boss, man, chill out. Or
Right.
maybe you should ask her what she meant by saying that. But the connection isn't working. So by doing things like taking a breath or taking a moment, we're providing ourselves an opportunity for that reconnection.
Yeah. So what are you seeing in your work and in with your clients? What are you seeing as the kind of the hidden cost of stress at work?
Look, I think hidden cost is that is what's in the word. So I'm always really interested when I first go into an organization. So I do like a significant amount of discussion with people before going in to
Mhm.
do, say, a leadership program. And so that's not just talking to the people that are asking for the leadership program, but it's also talking to people who actually are the core group to be delivered to. And similar to many experiences in HR, when you are in a position or the circumstances are right to be able to build trust with people, often you get quite a different version of events from the people doing the job than maybe people bringing you in.
Mhm.
And often that is around the hidden cost of this stuff. So it's the people that go, oh well, yeah, I know that a third of the people in my team are actively looking for jobs, but the
Mm.
manager doesn't know.
Mhm.
Or that a good chunk of the team don't trust the manager because of something that's happened. Or they don't trust the manager because they kind of seem like a company guy and the guy above them did something to lose their trust a while ago. And
Mhm.
so every time there's like a small little bit of that trust lost where people go, I'm not getting the real version of you, or
Yeah.
you're making decisions behind your title, not as a person or not in good faith, that becomes lost. And then every time that happens, the gap between what the groups know becomes wider and wider. And it's all of it's the things that are happening outside of work.
Mhm.
It's the relationship breakdowns that are happening inside of work. It's the people that won't go and even ask for help, maybe with a colleague who's on the verge of like significant bullying because they know that they're not going to be listened to. So all of the small problems get bigger.
Mhm.
And that's the thing that comes out in those briefing conversations. And then you get into it, and often the causes of the problems are similar, but because there's been that communication breakdown, like the groups understand that there are similar issues. But if there's been a communication breakdown or a lack of trust, the path to solve them requires like quite a lot of building blocks, right? Like that's an intentional path back. That's not just something we go, we've got a different perspective on this. Oh, we'll try and tell you earlier next time.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. So you talked a little bit about this, and I know we talked about this as well. What are you seeing as far as, or maybe what is your suggestion on how we can normalize mental health support in the workplace? Because there certainly used to be a stigma, and I think we've come a long way, but I also think that we've got some work to do. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a long process. I'd
Mhm.
love to like give a simple answer. but I've worked within government and big nonprofit and also the private sector. And I would say that an organization's outward statements about how mental health friendly or how progressive they are isn't necessarily always an accurate representation of what happens internally.
Mhm.
I think the biggest difference for people is the leaders. It's the manager that they report to, and it's the leadership of the organization.
Yeah.
And so, I would say, no matter what people say externally, it's people's internal experience that matters.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing more of that flow on, like, I don't know, 20 years ago, however long it was, when like internet reviews became really popular, right? You go to buy a new hairdryer and you'd be like, I'm going to find out what everyone said about that
Right.
hairdryer. Not as popular now because they're overrun with bots.
Mhm.
But I tell you what is interesting is more employees' reviews of their experiences in workplaces. So I'm not necessarily thinking about like Glassdoor, although like that's a great help.
Yeah.
But as people that people know and people
Mhm.
that they trust, and understanding what the actual environment is.
Right.
Because I think the future of it is the employees that people want to hire selecting the places that do it,
Mhm.
that do this well, that actually go, hey, our leaders are humans. We want to treat them like that.
Right.
We want to encourage them to focus on what matters with their team and give them the tools and resources and training to do that,
Mhm.
knowing that one person improving 10 people's productivity is so much better than that person improving their own productivity. Like, it's just
Mhm.
relatively basic.
Right.
But I think the future of it is employees and contractors, and however your relationship with an organization goes, those people choosing who does it well.
Mhm.
A decision about where they go, and then also, oh, I think I'm losing connection.
Yeah.
Um, if so, people being more honest about where they go, and I honestly think organizations are going to be forced into it.
Yeah.
I think that has to be the next step, because it's tied to productivity as well. Like, if organizations are not taking this seriously, if they do not have proactive, genuine strategies around mental health,
Mhm.
if they don't think about how do we really invest in our leaders to get the best out of our people, as opposed to like outsource to some e-learning provider that's going to magically tell you how to do stakeholder negotiations or something. That always cracks me up, with like no internal support, by the way. Like, just learn that from an e-learning, that'll work.
Yes.
um, Organizations are being pushed in that direction, and I think
Mhm.
it is about how do you create an environment for people to actually connect with each other,
Mm.
because it is in authenticity that people are able to access the ventral vagal zone, so their safe nervous system response
Mhm.
space.
Mhm.
And that's where people are creative. That's where people collaborate. That's where people do great things, because they're able to get into flow state. So it's about mental health, and it's about doing the right thing. But there's also a massive amount of self interest in this for companies to be shifting how we're looking at it, rather than a box ticking exercise. How do I make this a space that people want to be? That when people are here, they feel good and they feel connected and they feel well supported, and therefore they do a much better job than they would have access to otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as well, at least this is what I've always kind of coached and advised leaders and organizations that I've been part of, is remembering that mental health should have just as much care, if not more, than your physical health, especially because as much as your physical health can be dependent on, I mean, like, you can feel symptoms physically that are based on uh, uh, um, something going on mentally. Is we put doctor's appointments and things like that on our calendars, right? But then people will hide when they're actually seeking mental health. And I have never been that person. I mean, I can remember, I mean, obviously I'm kind of independent right now, but even when I had, teams and shared calendars and whatever, like, they knew that, like, this was my appointment to go and to my talk therapy or to my whatever. But I think that eliminating that stigma, you really have to set that example, and then people can feel
Yeah.
safe.
Actually, there's been two people who were senior to me in organisations that came out and spoke about their own mental health issues in a way that was amazingly respectful, that really made an impact on me and how I chose to share my stuff. I
Mhm.
had been, I had usually only ever shared anything in a work context where there'd been like a mutual disclosure or something, or there'd been a conversation where that had been really specifically relevant.
Mhm.
But I would have had, if I needed to go see the psychologist or something, like just not said anything.
Mhm.
With the influence of those people, I really changed my practice. Like I have complex PTSD. So a few years ago, I went through a really significant series of EMDR sessions and treatment around that, which was massive. But I was honest with the people that I worked with about what was going on. And look, that had positive and I think maybe some negative consequences for me. So I'm a big fan of it, but I think also when you have lived experience or living experience and you're thinking about whether you share your struggles, it's really like it's important for visibility and it's important for other people, but you also need to be able to manage, is this the right thing for me and my healing with where I'm at right now?
Yeah.
Um, I wouldn't change what I did um, at all, but I think that again, it's a really good example for why trauma informed leadership is so critical, because how we respond to that stuff matters. And
Yes.
it's not just the response at a time. You might have someone who's really able to be empathetic in the moment,
Mhm.
but then is that still true, or what does that mean for that person when a couple of months later something comes up and it's used as like a point of conversation, or
Mhm.
maybe that's just you, or does it damage your credibility, does it damage what people might be willing to share with you and not willing to share with you? And I'm like, obviously none of this is right,
Mhm.
but in self-interest for people and thinking about how they disclose what they disclose, being confident in your environment and security in your position, I think is something that you've got to be pretty privileged to be able to ignore. Because for
Yeah.
lots of people, that's not going to be true, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. If you could give a message to anyone feeling stuck, overwhelmed, unseen in their workplace or even personally right now, like what would your message be to them?
I think really being intentional about how you look after yourself and what things that you're doing, um, and that really acknowledging that that's different for different people and at different times.
Mhm.
Sometimes you can be in a workplace where the circumstances outside, like maybe you have to be, and maybe it's not a good place for your mental health. And so,
Mhm.
in those kind of situations, you're thinking about, well, what are the things that you can control? Like, what are they? Is it being able to do a little bit of somatic or body work, like maybe a little bit of yoga or polyvagal exercises where you might be focusing on de escalating your nervous system once a day? It's
Mhm.
not going to solve work, right? But it might help with your ability to manage and move through it.
Mhm.
If you don't have to be there, my advice is always get the out. Don't stay. If you don't have to and you're being treated poorly, or if it's not good for your mental health, get out.
Right.
I like, obviously, be practical, like need money to live and all of those things. But I don't think that it's ever worth your own mental health to try and change a system that doesn't want to be changed. I think
Mhm.
perhaps a more valuable thing to do is vote with your feet. Don't
Mhm.
sign an NDA. So then, when other people ask about what it was like to work there, you can be full and open and honest, you
Mhm.
know, while not engaging in any defamation. Um, but
We
the
tend to frown on
power,
that.
yeah, where you spend your time, and when you have the ability to choose where you spend your time, doing it with people that align with your values, doing it with an organization that aligns with your values, because that is often the rub point, right?
Mhm.
Is, oh, I got into this to help people, but actually I'm spending my time on politics, or
Mhm.
I got into this to be able to achieve this, but it's so difficult because these people do not have the same, like those things, that moral injury, that rub with what we believe and what we're able to do, that's
Mhm.
terrible for mental health. So
Yes.
being able to find something where you're aligned makes a huge difference. And sometimes you think you found it and you
Mhm.
haven't. Like so many people I talk with in the private sector go, I'd love to go work in nonprofit. And I'm like, I've worked in a lot of nonprofits and some of them are amazing. Some
Yes.
of them are worse than any private organization I've ever worked in. So like that whole romanticizing where you want to go, you want that
Yeah.
to be realistic too.
Right. Well, and you can be in a mission driven environment that's not nonprofit, that has some more autonomy and flexibility and ways to be perhaps more supportive, because you can get kind of into a box and kind of lose the ability to, maybe for people to truly show up the way that they would otherwise want to in certain situations. So yeah. Plus, I mean, no matter if it's for profit, nonprofit, whatever, I mean, people are people, and we're going to encounter different types of people. And I think that you're right. I think that people will definitely kind of romanticize it and say, oh, well, because that's the mission, right? Or because that is the mission or the vision, or that's for that business. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody in the business has that same mindset, and that you're not going to encounter somebody who is counter productive and counterintuitive to
Mm.
positive mental health. So we talked about kind of some red flags. What are some green flags for, let's say, somebody's going through their interviewing process, or they're in transition, which is obviously the focus of this podcast. What are some ways for someone to identify that maybe they're on the right track of finding an organization that kind of aligns with and would be supportive of their mental health? What are some green flags?
Um, Definitely looking into what the organization says about itself is like, so, I'm like, marketing's shit, but obviously you want to look at you
Right.
want to look at all the information you have. And you'll often find, like, I often see a gap between organizations that talk really glowingly about themselves doing what I would consider to be the bare minimum
Mm-hmm.
versus places that are actually doing things innovatively. And that can be hard to tell as like a punter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's one bit of input. The other is, and this is tried and true for everywhere, is talking to someone who's actually worked there or is working there about, is this real? And I think that the main thing that I focus my efforts on, or I encourage people to focus their efforts on, are what are the leaders like? Because you can work in the best organization in the world, and if you have an average or messy manager, like, it really sucks.
Yeah.
And the flip side, you can work somewhere that actually maybe they're only actually doing the bare minimum organizationally for mental health, but maybe they have a flipping amazing recruitment team who is able to
Mm-hmm.
hire leaders who are really values aligned, and they have a lot of autonomy.
Yeah.
And it's hard to know that from the outside. So that's the thing that you're checking, is what are they saying is true?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the leaders actually like? Like, where do they put their effort? You can tell a lot about an organization by where it spends its money or its employees, right? Do they
Mm-hmm.
spend all their money on NDAs, or do they spend their money on like leadership development and coaching? Because they have really different outcomes.
Yes. Yes, they do. So you are obviously, talking to me from the future, right? You're thousands of miles away. How can people learn more about you, work with you? Because I know that you could certainly, if we can have a conversation via Zoom or whatever, that you could certainly work with organizations that way as well. Do you have international clients at this point, or are you working mostly with people where you are?
Yeah, I do. I've actually just picked up a group of schools in the States, which is really cool. So I do virtual work. I also travel a little bit. I haven't done as much as I used to do when I came over for all the SHRM conferences.
Mhm.
But yeah, I do. I work virtually, so people can get in touch with me on my website. I also share a lot around yoga and body work and how that integrates with these principles and what people can do individually. So there's a
Mhm.
bit about organizational leadership stuff, but also personal practices in trauma recovery and managing chronic stress, because those things are very similar in what they do to our bodies and brains and the connections between them.
Mhm.
So I often find we're talking to people about one thing and they'll be like, oh, actually, this is a thing for me. Where do you suggest I start?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And we will link your website and all of that with the show. What would you want kind of your final words of encouragement for our listeners as we are taking good care of us, being kind to ourselves, self-compassionate? What's your kind of final message to our listeners?
I think the main thing that I would like to leave with people is that when you are, from my experience, when navigating mental health recovery or trauma recovery, um, it can be really easy for things to feel overwhelming when you try something and it doesn't work.
Mhm.
Um, whether that's like a type of therapy or a job or something else that you're like putting yourself out there for, that can be incredibly difficult.
Mhm.
My main thing that I like to emphasize is that different things work for different people at different times. And so it's really easy, I think, when you're in this space to hear something and go, that worked for that person, so it must work for me. And then somehow, like, I feel like a failure because I wasn't able to make it work or it didn't sit well with me or whatever. No, for therapy, for the things that you do to support that. So, whether that's like maybe body work or somatic therapy, kind of sitting alongside that, trying new jobs, doing new things, you might be able to do some of that stuff some days and not others. Or maybe some of it suits you and some of it doesn't. Or maybe some of it suits you at one point in your journey and it doesn't suit you later. And so, my biggest thing that I would like people to know and take on, if they have capacity for it, is that it's not your fault when things don't work. And sometimes it's just about finding the right mix of stuff for you.
Mhm. Thank you for that. And I know that we could talk forever and ever, and we're trying to be intentional about having, shorter shows and shorter conversations, but doesn't mean that we won't chat again in the future and on a time that's more civilized for our Aussie and our New Zealand friends, because I know it is very early in the morning where you are and where they are. But thank you so much for joining me, and I'm glad we were able to make this time together. Um, we will obviously save this, and if it didn't end up going live, then we'll put it out on all the platforms, and we'll share it. But thank you to all of us that were able to attend and to listen, or who are listening to this on the recorded version. We greatly appreciate your support of this podcast. It is very important to us to provide support and information and education to people as they're navigating not just job transitions, but life transitions. And so if you enjoyed this, please uh, like and subscribe to the podcast so that you can get future episodes, and join us next time as we amplify voices, elevate stories, and support one another, one episode at a time. Thank you so much.